Dana Fonteneau is a classical cellist who then sought training in psychotherapy and now works as an executive coach and with leaders in classical music. She's come by today to share some of her thoughts about classical music and specifically about how musicians can take charge of their lives and their careers. Dana, thank you so much for coming by the YCA office. And today I would love to talk to you about career and defining success when thinking about career. So my first question to you is, how do you define a career?
I define a career based on a series of decisions that are made over time, and often we look back and we see, that's the career that I've created, or that's the career I've built, and it's a series of small choices, small course corrections that we do every day that eventually becomes what we might call a career. I prefer to call it a life in music.
Okay. When we think about career, we often also think about the word success or sort of fulfillment or even the word happiness. One of the things that I found complicated when I was both in school and teaching is that there were so many external pressures to define what success meant. And I wonder what's your experience both as a cello student, as a cellist, and now in your work with helping musicians with the word success?
I've actually changed the focus from success to achievement.
Okay.
And with that, I've also changed it from achievement to fulfillment. So I look at fulfillment as a confirmation that I have learned from success and failure, and that achievement is the byproduct of fulfillment. So in the beginning, success had been defined for me based on how I saw it modeled or how I saw people react, if they reacted positively or they reacted negatively to the things that I achieved. I looked at external sources to define success, and that wasn't very fulfilling. It was a bit hit or miss. So I would achieve things and feel like it didn't quite feel right, and I didn't know why, and I assumed that success would mean I would feel good. So I actually really help people understand the difference between goals, achieving those goals, and how success is feedback that something's working well, and how failure is a feedback that something needs to get learned from. So both are actually feedback systems toward achievement, and achievement is something that are goals that are set that ultimately are fulfilling and inspiring.
So that's what's wonderful. What are some examples of how failure can then help one with achievement?
Well, oftentimes when we're not conscious of how we set goals, when goals are set for us, or we're told that we should do something, we should do that competition, or we should do that audition, or we should win that job, because that's what other people have done, and that is what signifies success. We don't often take the time to discern, is that truly meaningful? Is that truly inspiring? Is that actually congruent with what we want to do, how we want to make impact, what we want to learn and grow, etc.? So setting a goal toward achievement is definitely self-created, self-designed, self-informed. And sometimes we have to learn by trial and error. We try things out and we see that didn't fit, or that looked great on paper, but that didn't really feel very good, or that wasn't quite the right place, or the right colleagues, or the right collaboration. And so we learn from the bumper cars of feedback. And not everybody does, but for those who do, they tend to have a more fulfilling adventure.
What are some examples of things that people fall into because the expectations are there coming from the conservatory, from a teacher, from some external expectation about a career?
It really depends. I mean, some people are more aligned than others. They've found teachers who really get them, who are really attuned to what the student needs, so their direction is more in alignment with who they are. Other people might go to a teacher because that teacher has a great reputation or great connections or great influence, but perhaps it's not a good fit. So at some point, people have to learn how to listen to themselves on what is congruent or what is not congruent. And some of the feedback that we see, it could be anxiety, could be depression, could be major stage fright, could be addiction, depression, different ways that the body-mind will kind of inform the self that something's not on track, something's not in alignment.
So if a musician, let's say they're a couple years out of school and they're suffering just anxiety, stress, maybe regular illness, it might be a sign that what they're pursuing, the path they're pursuing, may not be aligned with what their highest values are in music?
It could be that, or it could be the way they're going about it. It's really a case-by-case basis. But sometimes, we don't know how to take care of ourselves very well. So you could be going completely along the right path in terms of what's inspiring for you, but if you don't know how to take care of yourself in a way to make it sustainable, where we cut a lot of corners as musicians with sleep or self-care or healthy diet or taking time off. So sometimes we just don't take very good care of ourselves, and that has a domino effect. Other times it could be feedback that we are not really listening to ourselves, and so it really depends on the person. But usually our emotions and our body gives us very clear feedback that something needs to get paid attention to and listened to and addressed.
How can a young musician, let's say again somebody just leaving school, think about goal setting? How could they discover where are the places where they should be pursuing achievement?
Well, hopefully by the time a student has graduated from a college or a conservatory, they have some sense of a trajectory of where they would love to go or what they would love to accomplish. Sometimes students get out of school and all of that has been told to them, and they suddenly lose that source of guidance or instruction. It's often common to see people just reproduce what they're seeing around them, either from their colleagues or their mentors. And goal setting is actually something that I think most musicians don't necessarily know how to do in a constructive way. Because the goals are not defined and they're not clearly structured, and there's no system or strategy to achieve them. So I think at some point everybody has to stop and figure that out for themselves.
Can you walk, which is a fabulous challenge and not easy.
No.
Can you walk us through what might be a process of setting a goal and working towards it? Let's use an example of a goal of somebody that wants to either start a concert series or start an ensemble that will have a certain sort of mission. What would be a way of sort of A to Z going about that endeavor?
I would say first and foremost, an ensemble must start with a vision, and the vision needs to have a who, what, where, when, and why, and how. That vision can be about the quality of music making, the kind of music making, the kind of composers, the kind of culture, the kind of community. It can involve the education, outreach. It could be collaboration with other genres, other departments, other professions, for example. But if there's no vision, then it's pretty hard to have a strategy. And the strategy can get communicated into a mission, a master plan, a budget, a strategic plan. Those things all get put into play once that vision is there. Because the hardest part about setting goals is that people don't necessarily know themselves very well. So for example, they might say, yes, I want to have a full-time performing career, and then they're not paying attention to the fact that they hate traveling, they hate staying in hotels, they hate being on the road all the time, and then they get sick all the time, and they think it's successful, and they think it's fulfilling, but they don't actually realize that they don't enjoy being on the road. That's a very common problem that a lot of people ignore in their own experience. So back to the point of setting goals. So once the ensemble has a clear idea of what they would love to accomplish, then they can think about strategy. Is a competition the best way to get the exposure or to get the influence or to get the funding for what they want to accomplish? Is it relationship building? Is it having exposure to different venues? Is it researching different collaborations? Do they need funding from a grant? Do they want to get funding from donors? These are all the kind of questions that come into that who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then that gets put into rehearsal because rehearsal involves strategy. So rehearsal needs to have clear goals in terms of what are the top 3 highest priority outcomes, what is the rehearsal for, what is the most efficient and effective way to solve those challenges, interpersonal dynamics. I mean, all of those things come into play, and they're integral in every part of the decision-making process. And most ensembles meet at a festival or at school, and they fall in love with how easy it is to play with each other, and they have a great time, and they say, great. And then they go, okay, we're going to go do a competition now, and what's our name? And then after that, some get really successful really fast, and they have no game plan. And it's totally delegated to their mentors or their sponsors, and then all the problems come out of the woodwork. And it's very rare that you get a really truly fabulous ensemble that has a longevity and sustainability.
So you said earlier that not enough musicians sort of know themselves or know what they love. And of course, when you are in conservatory, there's a very set curriculum, there's a very set of expectations, a very set rhythm of your daily life. I've also heard you talk about sort of how, or others have talked about how music is go, go, go. You're leaving school and thinking right away about the festival. You're leaving the festival and thinking right away about the next semester. What are some simple ways that musicians can begin to both learn about themselves and cultivate or identify that unique vision?
Most people have not been trained to even think about vision. And what's so tricky is that, I mean, even when I've worked with high school students in terms of preparing for a life in music, they've already been so conditioned to believe that they've got to get into the very best school with the very best teacher and win the top competitions, and that mindset is still out there, especially at some of the highest level teaching. And it's too bad, because that's really not the world we're living in post-pandemic. This idea of vision seems like it's static, or it's a clear master plan of goals and agendas and timelines. But what I've learned from my experience is that it's really more kind of micro awareness of internal feedback. So when I've done something that didn't feel very good, and it looked great on paper, but it felt horrible, for whatever reason, like it was a really great festival, but I was depressed the whole summer, or I hated the people I had to play with. We couldn't get along. The performance was forced, or I got a gig, teaching, and then I didn't quite line up with the philosophy of the leadership. And you get these little feedbacks that inform you this doesn't feel right. So you mentioned joy. Joy is a natural feedback system that we might be on track. Or inspiration. I love inspiration because that's so, once you really tap into it, it's very, very easy to listen to. So is pain. So I look at it more like collecting marbles of, that was inspiring. Oh, I love doing that. That felt really great. Oh, wow, those people really had me stretch and grow. I didn't know I was capable of doing that. Those people really are cool to be around because I love what they're up to. And then just paying attention, and it's more like, I want more of that. Okay, I want less of that. I want more of that. I want less of that. And at some point, when there's enough resource within, we can get to a point where that jar is filled with marbles, and there's enough marbles that you can start to say, okay, so instead of just surviving, instead of just making it, at this point, I would love to leave a legacy I'd love to leave impact. I want to make a difference. I want to, like, we get past ourselves, and that's the point I think vision really truly starts to come into play. But it starts with taking ownership and taking charge of how we engage, paying attention, self-awareness, and what we say yes to, what we say no to, being an active participant in that daily career building that I think eventually leads to vision. And vision isn't something that necessarily, well, actually, what I would say is that vision is two parts. So I remember very clearly having an inspired vision as a young child, very young. I remember dreams. I remember. I don't know what it was. I remember very clearly as a young child having a very clear vision, but it took me my whole life to actually turn that into something tangible, grounded, clear, and something that made sense. So I think there's an adult version of vision that's more grounded, integrated, strategic, and legacy building. And then we can have clarity very, very early, but it does need some adult assistance in translating that into how do you live that? How do you build that? What does that even mean?
Talk about feedback, and it's something that seems pretty common that musicians don't spend a lot of time reflecting back on the last engagement or the last experience. They don't go home from a music festival and sit down for a couple of hours over a cup of coffee and write what was good, what was bad. Talk about what feedback can do for self-awareness and cultivating vision.
Well, it's a two-part process in my experience. One is learning self-awareness, which is crucial, and then the other is taking that self-awareness and refining that into a master plan. That brings me also to the third point, which is optimization. So sometimes, we have feedback from our thoughts, we have feedback from our emotions, we have feedback from human behavior of other people, how they treat us, how long they wait to pay you, whether or not they listen to your writer. I mean, we get all kinds of feedback all the time. And if we're not actively engaged and taking charge of the process, then we're constantly at the mercy of the external circumstances where our experience is dependent on how other people do or do not behave. Being self-aware then gives options. So for example, let's say you do a gig and you loved the colleagues, but you hated the festival, meaning that the festival was at a school that had a cafeteria that served horrible food, and you had to stay in a dorm room that had a horrible bed and you couldn't sleep and there was too much noise and you hated the whole experience, but you loved the colleagues and you loved the performance. Well, that self-awareness means that you can engage next time and say, I'd really like to come, but I'd also need to make sure I have a place to stay that I can actually sleep and eat well. And then that experience is not at the mercy of your health and wellness. So self-awareness is key. Learning how to pay attention is key, because otherwise we're hit or miss, and we're kind of blindly going through life based on what other people do or do not do.
Is it a worthwhile thing to do a self-evaluation after a performance, an engagement, a residency?
Absolutely. I mean, actually there's an incredible story about Beyonce. Beyonce, after apparently, this is hearsay, but
she didn't tell you herself.
She didn't tell me herself, but colleagues who performed with her said that after every show, she goes and spends an hour on the bus, and she goes in great detail on what worked and what didn't work, and she writes it all down, and she puts plans in motion for the next show to improve. And I do think people who are at a very high level of achievement, are like athletes, are constantly tracking diet and hydration and air quality and stretching and mindset and, who's on their team and what their focus was and where their level of attention was. And I think, there's so many elements required to perform optimally, and mastery requires a self-awareness where a person is present enough to be able to pivot on a dime at any point in time, where if something goes off, you're present right there, and you can pivot and respond and adapt and be aware. And you don't want to be analyzing as you're going, because then you're not very present. But most people will either delegate their sense of performance based on how the audience responded, or if people complimented them or not. But then they don't always believe it, so they have this internal conflict, and they have a hard time receiving compliments because they don't, there's all kinds of messy stuff. But it's pretty hard to track a performance if you don't set clear, concise goals ahead of time. So it's almost impossible to say, well, how did that go, if you don't have a clear agenda of what you would love to accomplish before you go into the performance. So those two things go, goal setting and tracking and evaluating go hand in hand. And it really comes from a perspective of tracking outcomes versus emotional judgments of good or bad, right? So we're not there to go, did it go well? It's like, did I have the sound I wanted? Or did I have the presence I wanted? Or did I trust the timing? Or did I have a presence that expanded to the back of the hall? Or did I really get the character that I was going for? Or did I adapt when something distracted me? Those are things you can check off, as opposed to, was I good? That's a pretty horrible question because it's so hard to answer and reproduce.
I would love to ask how defining and cultivating vision, goal setting, and then working towards achievement actually affects the results, the music making, the life of the musician.
At some point, I think artists have to remember that they're whole human beings. And as goals become more specific, they by nature become more holistic, which means that if you're going to set a big, ambitious, inspiring goal, that's going to require a certain amount of self-care. That's going to require a certain level of empowerment financially. That's going to require influential and impactful relationships where they have a network that you can tap into. It requires the capacity to listen to others and actually pay attention to what needs are you serving. So it's not this ivory tower or bubble of, I just want to make beautiful music, because that's a pretty hard way to go through building a career. And then it just really keeps refining that level of self-awareness into what really brings out my best work, and what's the most efficient and effective way for me to achieve those goals, and how do I learn from the setback, or what is that course correction trying to teach me? How is that, is it just a 5-degree pivot, or is it a 95-degree pivot? It's often just 5 degrees, and when we're not really, or even 1 degree, and when we're not paying attention, there's just a lot of emotional angst, and I think really what we're talking about here is that it's really not about, is it vision, is it goal setting, is it strategy? It's really more about an individual taking charge, where they take accountability for their sense of self, their well-being, their goals, what they want to accomplish, but they're no longer being kind of batted around by the system, or they're no longer delegating their well-being and their life's fulfillment to what other people said they should do. And at some point that autonomy and that individuation and that authenticity kicks in, and that's very inspiring, because that's when doors start opening. Because when you're actually true to who you are and you're clear on who you'd love to serve, it's much easier. I mean, everything's hard, but it's much easier in that regard, because you're not playing hit or miss on what your life will be like.
And in your work, have you personally witnessed like a very dramatic shift when people sort out some of those things and begin to find the work that is going to help them produce their best?
When a person's self-worth and self-confidence shifts, and when they're no longer worried about, am I enough, and they're more focused on who can I impact, or how can I help, or who can I teach, or what can I share, that's an incredible pivot at every level of the industry and every level of profession I've worked with, because then it gets really exciting to see how a person is going to evolve and fulfill their potential. And people have achieved beautiful things financially and professionally, but really that sense of self, when that light comes on and they stop suffering from the I'm not enoughness to I'm so inspired to contribute, and here's how I'm going to do it, and here's who's on board, and here's the funding I got, and here are the people, and here's this, and then all of a sudden it's like a Christmas tree just lights up, and that to me is very fulfilling.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.